Ah, you've returned. It is time for chapter 42. Hospitals have their own relationship with distance. The corridors seem to stretch and contract depending on the hour. During the day when they are full of movement and noise, they feel manageable. But at night, when the overhead lights have dimmed and the sound of your own footsteps is the loudest thing in the corridor, they feel different, longer, more deliberate in their length. Most hospital workers will tell you this is simply the effect of tiredness and silence on perception, and most of the time they are right, but sometimes a hospital corridor is longer at night for a reason that has nothing to do with perception, and the exit at the far end is further away than it has any right to be. And the footsteps behind you do not belong to anyone you can see. A junior doctor was working his third consecutive overnight shift, tired in the particular way of someone running on discipline rather than energy. He was crossing between wards when he decided to take a shortcut through an older wing closed for scheduled renovation. He had used this route before during the day. It saved 10 minutes. The wing was not officially off-limits, simply closed. The lights running on emergency power only. A low greenish illumination that gave the corridor a quality distinctly different from the properly lit sections of the hospital. He entered and began walking at his usual pace. The corridor was empty. The doors on either side closed and dark. Renovation equipment stored along one wall. The particular atmosphere of a space in transition between what it had been and what it was going to become. Nothing unusual, not yet. He had been walking for perhaps 2 minutes when he noticed something wrong. The exit at the far end was not getting closer. He had walked this corridor enough times to have a reasonable sense of how long it took. By now the exit should have been clearly visible and close. It was visible, but it was not close. The corridor ahead appeared to stretch away in exactly the same proportion as when he had entered, as though he had not covered any distance at all. He stopped and looked back at the entrance. Behind him at the distance he had walked. He looked forward again at the exit, still distant, still maintaining the same relationship to his position. He stood in the low green light and felt the particular unease of someone whose reliable understanding of physical space has just been quietly but firmly contradicted. There are places where the ordinary rules of distance become unreliable. I know several of them personally. He began walking again, more quickly, watching the exit with focused attention. It moved, getting incrementally closer with each step, but the rate at which it approached did not correspond to his speed. He was moving faster than normal. The exit was approaching more slowly than it should have been, as though the corridor itself was extending ahead of him at a rate just slightly faster than he could cover it. He was perhaps 20 meters from the exit when he heard it. Footsteps, behind him, not running, not hurried, simply walking. At the same measured pace he himself had been walking when he entered the corridor. He did not stop, did not turn around. He continued toward the exit with the controlled urgency of someone who has decided that turning around is not the right choice. The footsteps behind him maintained a consistent distance, not getting closer, not falling further behind, simply present. keeping pace in the way of something not chasing him but not willing to let him go either. He reached the exit door and pushed through without slowing, into the properly lit corridor on the other side, into the ordinary sounds and smells of a functioning hospital wing. He stood on the other side of the door for a moment, then turned and looked back through the small glass panel. The corridor behind it was empty. The low green emergency lighting, the renovation equipment along one wall, the entrance at the far end exactly where it should be, the correct distance, the correct proportion, no figure, no presence, everything exactly as a closed hospital corridor waiting for renovation should appear. He stood at the glass panel and looked for a long moment, then continued to his ward and said nothing to anyone. He took the longer route for the remainder of his time at that hospital, adding the 10 minutes back into every journey without explanation. He told me this story years later, in the careful way of someone who has carried it for a long time. He said the thing that stayed with him most was not the length of the corridor, not even the footsteps. It was the moment he stood at the glass panel after pushing through the exit door and looked back. The corridor had been the correct length, everything normal, as though whatever had extended it had simply let it go once he was through, as though the point had not been to trap him, but simply to walk behind him for a while, in the particular way of something that finds a certain satisfaction in being followed, or in following. He was never entirely sure which. He returned to that hospital once, some years later, for an unrelated appointment in one of the newer wings. He found himself with a few minutes to spare and walked toward the older section almost without deciding to. He stood outside the door to the closed corridor, a different door now, the renovation long since completed. The wing reopened and properly lit and functioning as an ordinary hospital corridor should function. He stood outside it for a moment, then walked away without going in. Some places are best left as memories. He told me that what he thought about most, even now, was not what had followed him through that corridor, but the particular sound of its footsteps, measured, unhurried, keeping pace behind him without ever closing the distance, as though it had not been trying to catch him at all, but simply did not want to be the only thing walking in the dark. Another whispered story from Japan, shared quietly here beside the kotatsu. Some corridors are longer at night than geometry allows, and some shortcuts add time rather than saving it. If a familiar path has ever felt longer than it should have been, if footsteps have ever followed you through an empty space at a distance that never quite changed, you know where to find me. I am always here beside the kotatsu, waiting.